I gotta tell you, with all the ways to open up a final chapter in a book, this is not the metaphor that I would use to open up the final chapter of the book. You'll see what I mean when I get there, I think. They use the metaphor of a very old, in fact, ancient animal called a pachyderm with these four really solid trunks that it walked around on like an elephant. And they're trying to make the case, the authors are, that this is the way that we should summarize the perspectives that we've been studying throughout the course and look at each group of perspectives as a trunk on this pachyderm. Well, I'm just going to throw that away because that's not the way that my brain is processing this information. I would like the entry point for our subject matter to be today for you to consider, not necessarily now, because some of you still have some chapters to go in this class and some assignments to complete, but do you consider yourself to be a more sophisticated media critic because of what you've learned in this class? Are you able now to take a look at any media content, whether it's the traditional legacy media content, such as radio, television, newspapers, and film, or more modern social media, internet based media content, app based content, video game content? Are you able to look at that kind of content? Are you able to look at pop content that you would also be considered to be media content, like t shirt sayings and bumper stickers and billboards and coffee mugs and memes? Are you able to look at media content across the vast array from a much more critical standpoint? Of course you are. Of course you are, because you've studied media criticism. You've studied the ability, not just using the ability, but you studied the ability to grasp foundational theories, principles, concepts, descriptions, discoveries from some of the leading thinkers, not just in media, but actually mostly from outside the fields of media. We've looked at scholars from philosophy, from psychology, from rhetoric, which would be considered most closely the communication field, sociology as well. So you've been able to study some of the most leading scholars, not necessarily at their core. You're going to be doing that for this final paper, which I'm going to be assigning today, but you've certainly studied the ideas of Saussure, for example, or Aristotle throughout this class. And so you have a kind of foundational knowledge now, which is going to allow you to proceed to the future to understand media content in a much more sophisticated way than most people around you. Nevertheless, let's take a look at where you have been in this class, and so that we can figure out how we can say what the holistic idea is about what your knowledge is from this class. Where have we been? Well, the first thing that we did in this class, not that we actually identified it this way, but we did take an industry analysis. If you want to take a really broad grouping of several chapters at one time, they would be considered the first portion of the book, and that was an industry analysis looking at the industry of mass media, right? So the first thing that we looked at was the Marxist approach, and that's a focus on the profit motive and how most media industries are profit-making industries, and they're trying to make money. And what is the impact of that on the people who are not only working for those organizations, but the audiences who are attending those organizations and the advertisements and all the rest of it that they are subjected to? The profit motive is a complete directive for how media systems should operate. It structures both the industry and also the content. And that the economics of the media industry, at least the way that they are currently constructed, because of the prism of Marxism that we use, we found that the economics of the media industry are restricting diversity in terms of ethnicity and females and just overall ideas. And we also know that ideology is an important part of a Marxist framework, a critical cultural studies framework. That's what we called it. It's really a Marxist framework. We called it a critical cultural studies framework, the ideology, a way of seeing the world, how it sneaks up on you, a way of seeing that China's the bad actor in the coronavirus. They could have stopped it. That's a way of seeing the world. Another way of seeing the world, the coronavirus is a hoax. It's just, a normal flu. It's just a little bit worse. Yet another way of seeing the coronavirus from an ideological standpoint is it was planted by some subterfuge organization. I'm not going to say where it was. These are three, and there are many more, right? That's what an ideology is. So that's what Marxism is all about. It's looking at the organization as it's structured, primarily because of the economic impact set up by the way that economics operate in the media industry. Now let's move on to the second media industry approach, which was organizational. We took a look at organization. The focus here was on the hierarchies in an organization. You got the managers, you got the board of directors, you got the people who are extracting minerals from the ground, and how that influences content, the organization, because the economy is only one factor that influences the media industry. The rest is the people who are working for the organization. And even the idea of news in and of itself, it's not objective. It's not objective. If you're a reporter right now and you have a family member who has contracted the coronavirus, you might be more likely to have more of an intonation in your voice when you deliver that news, because you are a human being, because you have somebody who's affected by something, and you're a person. So an organizational analysis looks at the range of activity that a person like that can have within the structure of an organization. A reporter can let it loose a little bit, but can't start crying on the air, right? Because there's norms and practices of an organization. The organization is another way of looking at an industrial analysis of media. And then finally, we had the pragmatic analysis. That's the third industrial analysis that looks at both the federal regulation of media industries and also the self-regulation of media industries deciding that they are going to refrain from certain practices, like media industries. Radio stations do not report suicides. Did you know that? They do not report suicides because they don't want to trigger an epidemic amongst young people who are already feeling vulnerable and might see it as a legitimate means of escaping. And so they just don't do it. It's not that it's illegal. That's an internal self-imposed regulation versus an FCC regulation, which says that you cannot swear, or that you cannot lie about somebody's character on the air, or that if you report on one political candidate and have them on your talk show, you have to invite somebody from an opposing party. So that sums up this pragmatic analysis. Now we're going to go on to the approach 2. This is a non-industrial analysis. Now we're under media messaging. Messaging is a key word here. And all the chapters that are grouped under messaging, they have to do with rhetorical studies, for example. Rhetorical studies is the study of signs and symbols and how audiences are moved